The New York Giants head coaching search is underway. We'll get you up to date on the candidates and what the Giants should be looking for in their next head coach. Coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name's Patricia Traina. Happy Monday to everybody. We are knee-deep now in the New York Giants head coach search, and we're going to get you up to date on that. We're also going to talk about some of the qualities that would be ideal for the New York Giants, the next New York Giants head coach. So that's coming up on today's program. But first, let me thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And also, let me just quick remind you that tomorrow we'll be doing a Twitter Tuesday. So as always, send me your questions. You can send them to lockedongiantspodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet them to me by tagging them Ask P Traina. My Twitter handle, as you can see on the screen below, is at Patricia_Traina. So hope to hear from you guys and gals. Love to hear your questions. All right. So we're going to talk Giants head coaching candidates and what the Giants should be looking for in their next head coaching candidate. So first, let me get you up to date on what has transpired since we last spoke to you here on the Locked On Giants podcast. New York has interviewed both Buffalo coordinators, Leslie Frazier, the defensive coordinator, and Brian Daboll, the offensive coordinator. That was done Friday and Saturday. Friday for Daboll, Saturday for Frazier by new Giants GM Joe Schoen. Obviously, the connection there is the Buffalo connection, because that's where Shane comes from. So those are two guys that are in the books. Now, as you are viewing this, the Giants are set to interview Dan Quinn, the Dallas defensive coordinator. I think he's coming in at some point today, if he isn't already in there, depending on when you're watching this again. Brian Flores is on the list. Patrick Graham is on the list. And a surprise addition to the list that was announced, well, not announced, but which was reported on Sunday, is Bengals defensive coordinator and former Giants defensive backs coach back in 2018, Lou Anarumo. So that's the surprise candidate. We're looking at 6 candidates for the Giants head coaching position, in line with what Joe Schoen said about casting a wide net and, experienced guys who have never been head coaches before. He's so far so good. He's kept true to his word as far as, who they're interviewing. So the idea or the hope, I believe, is to get this wrapped up by the end of the week and come up with a decision shortly thereafter, because then you're talking about the college all-star games getting underway. The Senior Bowl is coming up. I know that. You're going to have the HBCU Bowl is coming up. The Combine is going to be coming up. So you want to get the coaching staff in place as quickly as possible so that you can start getting to work on what you need to do with the roster. So that's where they stand as far as the candidates go. Now, what we're going to do the rest of the way in this show is we're going to talk about some of the characteristics and things that the Giants hopefully will look for in their next head coaching candidate. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this off. Number 1, leadership skills. That goes without saying. The coach has to be a proactive leader. He can't just be the guy that sits back with his feet up on the desk and delegates everything to his assistant coaches and chief of staff and whatnot. So how will the coach respond to adversity, which is a huge, huge factor? Nothing ever goes according to plan. Coaches do have to deal with adversity. How is coach going to respond to it? Is he going to point fingers? Is he going to put the blame on himself? How's he going to put these fires out that pop up during the course of a of a day or a week or a season. How and when these fires do pop up, can he hold the locker room together? Now, Joe Judge, when he was the head coach, did a pretty good job of holding the locker room together. You didn't hear guys pointing the fingers at one another. You didn't hear anybody griping publicly, at any rate, or on the record about what was going on and what was going wrong. They stuck together. And that was the sign, I think, of a solid leadership. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody was happy, but certainly, you want the coach to keep everybody, from just splintering, unlike what we saw with when Ben McAdoo was here, and he, the locker room just absolutely splintered beyond recognition. So leadership skills is a big one. Item number 2, flexibility and a willingness to adjust. Now, how many times have we heard a coach talk about the process? We heard Joe Judge talk about it. We heard Pat Shermer talk about it. We heard Ben McAdoo talk about it. Okay, it's okay to have a process in place, but you have to be flexible enough to adapt and adjust if the process needs it. So in other words, what worked 10 years ago might not work today. What worked last season with a different roster might not work today. So are you willing to be flexible, or are you married to that system to where no matter what, you're going to stick with it till death do you part? So flexibility is a big thing, and the willingness to anticipate and adjust accordingly is huge for the next Giants head coach. All right, item number 3. Building relationships. Now, we all know at this point, when Tom Coughlin was hired as the Giants head coach back in 2004, relationships were not his strong suit. He was pretty much General Tom. He came in, he barked out orders, didn't really have any kind of relationship with his players. Didn't stop to talk to see how they were doing. And there was a story that he famously find a bunch of players who were late getting back to training camp one day, players who had encountered an accident on the roadway and who had to take a detour that added time to their travel. You can't have that, folks. Not in today's workplace, not in today's world. And then you look at Joe Judge, who this past winter or this past season, when a snow and ice storm created hours-long traffic delays for his players and coaches, Judge just simply adjusted the schedule because he had the relationships with the players. Now, he also, allowed guys to take leave, to be with their families if something popped up. You look at Billy Price, obviously. Logan Ryan last year was given the option to be with his wife when they unfortunately had to, suffered the miscarriage from an ectopic pregnancy. So little things like that you want to see your head coach be able to do, because in the end, you want your players to be able to run or to want to run through a brick wall for you. And if they're not, that means you're really not building up the relationships the way you need to. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, if you're aiming to eat healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, but without the calories and without the sugar. Most Built Bars have about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein, making it easy to stick to any diet plan. Head on over to BuiltBar.com and use our special promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, to get 15% off your first order. Again, that's code LOCKED15 for 15% off your first order at BuiltBar.com. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I am Patricia Traina, and we're talking the next Giants head coach. Gave you a rundown on who is on the list of interviews, and now we're talking about some of the qualities and things that ownership and new general manager Joe Schoen probably are going to be looking for in the next head coach candidate. So let's continue on. We've got a few more to go. This next point I know is going to be a little bit on the controversial side, but I'm going to explain the reasoning behind it. And I also want to stress that it is not a deal breaker. But if I'm the Giants, I think I would want, ideally, an offensive minded coach. All right. Now, again, it is not a deal breaker. I'm not saying that, I would rule out a defensive minded head coach or a CEO style head coach. But the reason why I would want somebody who has a deep background on the offensive side of the ball is for several reasons. Number one, the Giants' offense, as we know, has been a mess. And it is way further behind than the Giants' defense at this juncture. So let's get somebody in here who can fix it, who can lay down a system that year after year after year is going to be the foundation. We don't have to worry about, a coach, a hotshot offensive coordinator, for example, getting hired as a head coach. If the head coach of the Giants is an offensive-minded coach, he's going to be here, chances are, for a while. So that will give that offense a chance for stability and consistency that it really hasn't had in a number of years. So that's main reason number one. Main reason number two is you look at the league rules and how they have favored scoring opportunities. All right. You want somebody who is creative and innovative enough to take advantage of those rules. Defenses they win championships. So you need a good defensive minded coach, no question. But building up the offense, I think, is a little trickier than building up a defense. You want somebody who's innovative, who's creative, who looks at the talent he has and doesn't say, okay, I've got Saquon Barkley on my team, so I'm going to have him do A, B, and C, but I know he can do E, F, G, and H, but I can't quite figure out how to incorporate that into my offense, so I'll just go with what he does best. No, you want to get the most out of every single player and his respective skill set. So I tend to favor an offensive-minded coach if it were me. But again, I want to stress this. It's not a deal breaker. It's just, if given my druthers, that's what I would want to see. But it is not a deal breaker. Cannot stress that enough, folks. All right. The next item on the list, aggressiveness. I don't want a guy who is going to be passive, such as a guy who runs out the clock at the end of the first half, or a guy who decides to punt because he's going to, he knows he's going to get the ball back to start the third quarter, or there's plenty of time left. Look, you only get so many opportunities in a game to score. And this tendency to waste them, no, I don't want to see that. Take advantage of every opportunity you have and don't be passive. Don't be, we've got third and long, so, we're going to go this way instead of that way. No, be aggressive. You look at around the league and you see more and more teams are being aggressive. The Giants last year, not so much so. And you wonder how many times that they were passive, where had they been aggressive, would they have had better results? It's fair to wonder. But anyway, that's what I'm hoping. Regardless of what side of the ball the coach comes from, I want him to be aggressive. I want him to put his foot on the opponent's jugular and not let up. All right. Next item on the list. Someone who is open-minded. All right. Now, look, this kind of falls under the leadership quality and whatnot. But here's the bottom line. You're going to be managing 53 players, probably 16 practice squad guys. You're going to have a staff of at least 20. You're going to have people in the front office that you have to deal with on a daily basis. Not everybody's going to be cut from the same cloth as you. So, as much as we like to surround ourselves with people who have similar backgrounds as us or ideals, it's just not going to happen. So you need to be open-minded enough to say, okay, you know what? this person maybe doesn't think the way I do, but that doesn't make them any less at their job. And oh, by the way, I wouldn't mind seeing, some women on the football coaching staff. So this is what I'm kind of talking about. Don't just say, okay, it's a man's game. It's, if there's a qualified woman coach out there, or even a woman to be a chief of staff for the head coach, I'm all for it. And I hope that individual goes for it, So that's what I'm talking about when I mean open-mindedness. I'm talking about being able to understand the different backgrounds of people and so on and so forth. And I just think that's very, very important for a head coach to just be open-minded and not, lock into a specific set of skills for their staff. All right, folks, I've got 3 more on my list of qualities that I want to see for a head coach. Stick around and I'll give you the last 3 coming up next. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's Locked On Giants podcast. But first, let me tell you about the Get Upside app. You can get up to 25 cents back for every gallon of gas every time you fill up at the pump. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play right now. And when you use the promo code Touchdown to sign up for your account, you will get a bonus 25 cents per gallon back on your first fill up. That's 50 cents back per gallon on your first fill up when you use that promo code to sign up. You can cash out anytime you want with the Get Upside app, either to your bank account via PayPal, or you can get an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Again, that's the Get Upside app, and that promo code for your bonus total of 50 cents off per gallon on your first fill up is Touchdown. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. Patricia Traina here with you. And again, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or if you're watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. And we are talking Giants head coaching candidates. We ran down a list of people who have been linked to the team's interview process for the vacant head coaching job. And I've been running down a list of qualities and questions that I'm hoping to see the next the next head coach possess. So we have 3 more. And before I get into them, just again, a reminder, Twitter Tuesday tomorrow. So please get your questions in ASAP. And I'm going to be recording the Twitter Tuesday show probably around 8 o'clock on Monday night. So you have until then to get your questions into me. Okay, got about 3 more characteristics, questions I would say the next Giants head coach has to answer. And I'll start off with the staff. Now, if there was one thing that drove me crazy about Joe Judge's staff, was that 98% roughly were guys that he had some sort of connection to, whether it be colleagues, whether it be friends, or what have you. I think the only coaches that he didn't have a prior connection to, I want to say, were Tyke Tolbert, the receivers coach, and I believe Thomas McGahee, the special teams coach. But otherwise, everybody on that team, on his staff, he had a prior connection to. I do not want to see that with the next head coach. I want to see the best possible coaching staff. Because, look, that can make or break a guy. I've said this before, for what it's worth. I felt that Pat Shurmur, when he was hired as the Giants head coach in 2018, I believe it was, when he came in here, he did not put together the best possible staff he could. Now, how much of that was a result of him, being with the Vikings and them going all the way to the NFC Championship game to where Shurmur got a late start? That's certainly something you could take into consideration. But I just felt like some of the coaching decisions were forced. Some of them, like Mike Shula, for example, who became the offensive coordinator. That was a recommendation from then general manager Dave Gettleman. No, you've got to look for the best possible candidates. Now, you can't look indefinitely, but you've got to cast a wide enough net, because there are certain positions that you need quality people on. And those other positions, by the way, speaking of the staff, you want to have bright young football minds that you can develop through the pipelines. So say, for example, your defensive coordinator moves on. Well, maybe you've got a young assistant coach who's either a quality control coach or a special projects or a position coach, that person is rising up the ranks to take over. Because, look, you're not just developing players to eventually become starters and play, major roles on the team. You're also looking to develop coaches who can one day, take on greater responsibility. So that's very important as well. And, that's why I don't want to see them lock in to guys that the head coach has known in a prior life. Along those lines, you also want to ask about the size of the intended staff. Joe Judge last year had one of the largest, if not maybe the second largest staff in the league last year, behind Bruce Arians, who I think had the largest staff. All right. It's okay to have a big staff, but ask yourself why you're having a big staff. Now, Joe Judge obviously was a first-time head coach, tried to surround himself with as many voices as possible, and also believed that it made sense to break up some of the responsibilities into smaller chunks among the assistants. But you got to be careful of that because sometimes there's overlap. So sometimes it's not such a good idea to break things up into micro responsibilities because of the overlap possibility. So that's a big factor, obviously, that has to be addressed. Next point, don't hire a head coach because he came from a system. Bill Belichick's coaching tree seems to be very high in demand, and with good reason. Belichick is a Hall of Fame head coach. His assistants haven't really fared well when it's come to, winning Super Bowls. So just because Belichick has been the gold standard doesn't mean that his assistants are going to be the gold standard, especially if they only come from that one system. More and more, it's interesting. I think more and more league people are looking towards, Kyle Shanahan's staff, maybe Sean McVay's staff, because these are innovative minds who, even though they haven't been coaching as long as Belichick, these are guys who have had solid coaches. You look at Zach Taylor, for example, the Bengals head coach who came from McVay's staff from the Rams. So that's what you want to kind of see. You don't want to have to go back to the Belichick staff or, even the McCarthy staff, some of the older coaches. I mean, again, no disrespect to those guys, but, just because Belichick had success in his career doesn't mean his assistants will. It also doesn't mean that his assistants are going to be or are going to have the other traits, in terms of flexibility, in terms of creativity to do things differently once they get to a new team. That was a mistake we saw with Joe Judge and the Giants. Joe Judge, he was hardwired to do things the way Nick Saban and Bill Belichick did it. And those ways might have worked with a better roster, but they did not work with the Giants roster that wasn't as good. And we all know what happened. So yeah, connections don't need to be, I think, as big of a deal. All right. And then the final thing that you want to make sure of with the head coach is the hierarchy. All right. So we've heard John Mara say that the head coach and GM are going to be the ones driving the roster building process. Okay, great. So what happens if they disagree on a player? Who gets the final say? Theoretically, it should be the GM. But will it be? And if the head coach is told no so many times, will he rise up and have problems with that? There was a report in I think it was the Miami Herald, that Brian Flores had some disagreements with Chris Greer, the GM down in Miami. And, Brian Flores now is available on the open market for a head coaching job. So there has to be a give and take, obviously, between the GM and the head coach. But look, they're not going to agree every time. And is the GM comfortable enough to say, no, you can't have your guy because this, and this? And how is the head coach going to respond, again, when he is told no? So that is very important because, look, we don't like to be told no. I think if we all, if we were given our choices on everything we do related to our job, we would want our bosses to say yes, but that's not always how it's going to be. And you got to know when to pick and choose your battles. And most importantly, you have to know how to fight those battles so that you don't create gaps in the relationship that ultimately could lead to it being either he goes or I go. So anyway, that's my rundown of qualities and questions regarding the Giants' next head coach. Joe Schoen has already interviewed 2 guys. So actually, it'll be 3 by the time you hear this because, like I said, Dan Quinn is coming in on Monday. So depending on when you hear this, Dan Quinn may or may not have had his interview. More will follow. Who's it going to be? I can give you my preferences. I don't know necessarily that they will win it, but my preferences would be Brian Dable would be choice 1. And I think Dan Quinn would be my second choice. The guys that I am iffy about, I think would be Patrick Graham. I think I would be iffy about Leslie Frazier. And I would be iffy about Anarumo and Flores. So my 2 choices right now would be Dable or Dan Quinn. So who's it going to be? Well, we will find out hopefully in the next few days who the Giants are thinking. And as soon as we have that, we will, of course, bring you that announcement with reaction here on the Locked On Giants podcast. So that will do it for us, folks, for today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in tomorrow. Again, we're planning Twitter Tuesday, and then we'll just keep rolling right along with the shows for the rest of the week as we inch closer to finding out who the second half of the Giants engine, if you will, who the second half of that's going to be to complement new GM Joe Schoen. So until tomorrow, everybody, have a great one, and thanks again for tuning in.